Recording in progress.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol niyeh b'dvaroi. Amen. Okay, good morning, Chavra. Welcome back to another week, Be'ezras Hashem, of Likutei Moharan. V'siyata d'shmaya. Today's shir is sponsored by Dina and Avi Hoshlander. Nishmas Avi's grandmother Chaya Yaakov, which was Yartzeit is today, and Nishmas Avishai Neuman's father, Chaim Naftali ben Yaakov Shlomo Neuman, whose Yartzeit is today as well. And Shem Ayin also by Yitzchak Gedalyah ben Ilanit for the zechus of Menashe Gavriel ben Chava and Avraham Shlomo ben Ilanit, and by Zev Klein, Nishmas his parents, Rivka Bryndel, Bas Tzvi Simcha, and Yaakov ben Ishayo, also dedicated as a zechus for Shlomo for Chaim Yehoshua ben Chaya Miriam, who should continue to improve Be'ezras Hashem day by day. So we jump back into Likutei Moharan. We're taking a look today at Torah Mem Zayin, B'siyata d'shmaya, which is a brand new teaching and a challenging one. It is terse, it is dense. Be'ezras Hashem, you'll see that about halfway through the lesson, a little bit more than halfway through, or less rather than halfway through the lesson, it comprises the majority of the lesson. At the bottom of the second column, Reb Nosson is going to take over much in the same way that he did in Torah Mem Vav. So I don't know exactly whether, and I don't think it is known, whether this Torah was revealed also earlier on in Reb Nosson's journey. I'm not 1,000% certain. What I do know, or what they claim to know in the Mefarshim, is that Torah Mem Ches was said over Isur Chag Sukkos. We can surmise from there, because the other one was Anitzavim. So, toward the end of that year. So it's possible that these things were said in order, and Mem Zayin was said somewhere around that time as well. Okay, Rabbi Nachman comments on a pasuk in Yoel, which again, in the first aspect of the lesson, as it's being revealed, he didn't actually get to the explanation of that pasuk. Reb Nosson takes over, and Reb Nosson fills in the missing information. But we'll get there. And the pasuk, I'll just read it in full, says, "Va'achaltem achol v'savaya," or v'savaya. It's a pasuk in Yoel. Parak Beis, you shall eat, and you shall be satisfied. V'hilaltem es Shem Hashem Elokeichem, you shall praise Hashem your God. Asher asa imachem, for all of the nisim that he did with you, lahafli, in a wondrous way. And then the pasuk ends, V'lo yevoshu ami la'olam, and my nation shall never be shamed or embarrassed. And Rabbi Nachman is going to explain the smichas hadvarim in the most remarkable, incredible way. But like I said, until Reb Nosson takes over, it's quite dense and it's quite difficult. So Reb Nosson's going to literally take us back to the beginning and put things in a way that's more mesudar. Over here, this was sort of Rabbi Nachman's cliff notes, his own sheer notes, lecture notes, so to speak. And so it is a little bit less intelligible. But hopefully we'll cover that, and then we'll see Reb Nosson take over. Says the Heilige Rebbe, Zechus Yagon Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael, Amen. V'achaltem achol v'saveh v'hilaltem. Okay. This is strong musar, this Torah, so we have to make ourselves very strong before we start. Okay? Says the Rebbe, Mishu Meshuka b'Taavas Achilah, a person who is still stuck in Taavas Achilah, just 99.999% of people, let's say. A person who, as we're going to see, is just drawn very naturally to overeating. And this is something actually we made reference to in Torah Lamed Tes, when we spoke about escaping, right, from our own anxieties, from our own stresses and inner processes. Instead of working through things, we just run to external stimulation, food being one of them. Says the Rebbe, biyadua, it's an indicator shehu rachak me'emes, that a person is distant from emes, ubiyadua, and it is known, and it becomes known, shadinim shayrin alav, that there are dinim, a person's living in an experience of constriction and din that dwells upon that person, gamza siman al dalas, and it is also an indicator that paucity, that poverty is coming, at least in one way or another. Gam yavli de bizyonis ubushas, this is also a shameful existence. Kamashakasav kerum zulus livnei adam. The pasuk in Tehillim refers to that which is rum, that which is elevated, zulus livnei adam, which is denigrated by people. And one of the interpretations of the Gemara over there is kivin shenitzrich adam labrias. When a person is called nitzrich labrias, this becomes a very important theme later on in the Sefer. And again, Rabbi Nachman is a very modern Sefer, even though it's 300, 200, about 300 years ago. But he was anticipating modern social dynamics. And he speaks over there about what's called nitzrich labrias, which essentially means a person who does not have a strong sense of self, doesn't have self-worth, doesn't have confidence, and he's constantly nitzrich labrias. In other words, the only way that a person's able to survive is he's always checking to see other people's reactions, right? And not able to assert himself or herself powerfully on their own. So the Gemara says, Kivin shenitzrich adam labrias nishtana panav kekrum. Their face changes colors kekrum, like a bird that is called the krum bird, which when the sun rises reflects many, many different colors. Okay, so again, very dense. The Rebbe said a lot of things. It's 4 lines, but the Rebbe packed in a lot. Reb Nosson going to do a little bit of the unpacking, so I'm not going to sort of explicate this right now. We're going to let Reb Nosson do that. Let's just try to make our way through the beginning of the Torah, see the themes, and then Reb Nosson takes over. So the Rebbe continues, Veda, and a person should know that Mishu Mishaber Taavas Achilah, a person who is able to be mishaber this taiva, which as we're going to see is very straightforward. It just means don't eat a lot. Like that's what we're going to see. But the Rebbe, mishaber Taavas Achilah is not a very complicated thing. It's a very simple thing. As we're going to see, HaKadosh Baruch Hu oisal yadai moifsim. That person will be able to do wondrous acts on account of HaKadosh Baruch Hu acting through that person. Shviras hateva, right, is the basic understanding, the same way that the Yam split on account of Arona Shel Yosef, like Chazal tell us, right? Hayam ra'av ayanos. What did the Yam see that it ran away, right? What did the sea see? It saw Arona Shel Yosef. Ma kesher. Since Yosef HaTzadik was able to break his own teva with Eishes Peitifar, the Yam said, I can break my teva, and water is not supposed to split, and the air can go ahead and split. Same idea over here. A person who has broken their natural inclination for Taavas Achilah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu oisal yadei moifsim. All of a sudden he lives in a remarkable, miraculous world. And all of a sudden, the things that are the one way for everybody else, for that person, it can split open nature. Ki amru chachamim is because Chazal say, okay, this gets a little bit technical, but we'll see. Reb Nosson will explain. Ksiv asher lo yisapanim. On the one hand, the pasuk says HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not take bribes. Lo yisapanim, lo yikach shoichat. Right? You can't bribe HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's not going to become more favorable to one than another. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is tachlis hamishpat, tachlis ha'emes. There's no favoritism. Uksiv, but on the same time, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Yisa Hashem panav elecha. We say in Birchas Kahanim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should turn his face toward Klal Yisrael. Yisa Hashem panav elecha. So, Sestira says the Gemara in Brachas Chava Beis Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Eich lo ya'asa lehem panim. Meaning, in Chanami, generally HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Asher lo yikach, Asher lo yisa panim. But how can I not be masib panim to Klal Yisrael? Because Aniya marti v'achalta v'savata v'irachta, that they should eat and they should be satiated and they should make a bracha. And they are even more medaktik, right? That not only when a person sits down and eats a whole meal, but even kazayas kabeya and the brachas that they're making, etc. Nimtza shenesias panim hu al yidei shibur Taavas Achilah. But the Rebbe wants to interpret this medaktikim al atzmam kazayas kabeya to refer to eating little and not eating a lot. HaKadosh Baruch Hu allowed us to be satiated, but we are going and we are trying to make sure it's only kazayas, it's only kabeya, and not eating to our full. V'zeh and that's pshat in the pasuk of Devarim. Histarti panai v'hoyle echol. Al pi pshat, the pasuk in the Teichacha means Hashem says, "V'histarti panai, I shall hide my face, chas v'shalom v'hoyle echol," and Klal Yisrael will be the food of the nations. Right? We're going to be just able to be devoured, so to speak. Says the Rebbe, "V'histarti panai v'hoyle echol." Pirish, you can read the pasuk in the other way. Al yedei Taavas Achilah v'hoyle echol humaster panai v'histarti panai. He learns that al pi pshat. A person sits down to eat a meal at a Taavas Achilah. Says the pasuk v'hoyle echol v'histarti panai. Okay, v'ha'aras panim, but the ha'aras panim, this aspect of a person who merits HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Ya'er Hashem panav elecha on account of Shviras Taavas Achilah, hu tikun ve'emes. This light shines forth from the word ve'emes in the Yud Gimel Midas of Rachman. V'shem Hashem kol Rachman v'chana erech ha'pam b'rav chesed, and there's ve'emes. And in Kabbalah, all of these words are called tikkunim. Each one is a tikkun. Each word is a special rectification, is a special alignment of spiritual energies that enables Rachamim to flow down to the world. This word ve'emes is the tikkun of a person who is merited ha'aras panim on account of Taavas Achilah. Right? Go back to the first line we said in the Torah that a person who is meshukah with Taavas Achilah v'yadua shehu rachek me'emes. So a person who has been mishaber Taavas Achilah, what does that show us? That person has the light of emes shining into their lives, bechinas Yaakov, which is a bechina, the Rebbe's favorite symbol of Yaakov Avinu k'may shekasav titein emes liYaakov. This is the energy of Yaakov Avinu consciousness, which means everything that we've been learning about Yaakov Avinu from Torah Aleph, literally all the way through, is wrapped up in this experience of Shviras Taavas Achilah. To the extent that a person is seeing success in this area of Avodas Hashem, so the ha'ara of Yaakov Avinu is shining into that person's life. Vehu b'chinas tefillin. So again, it's a very dense paragraph, right? There's a ton of different symbols and elements. And Rav Nosson will explicate and flesh this out and elucidate. Says the Rebbe, this is the aspect of tefillin. Ki Yaakov hu tiferes. We know Yaakov Avinu's midah is the midah of tiferes. Like we said a bunch of times recently, Yaakov ishtam, Yoshev Ayhalim. Ayhalim is seen as a reference to the two tenths of Avraham and Yitzchak respectively, and ishtam is the ICS yesh emes. So Yaakov Avinu, who's Titan Emes LiYaakov, is Yoshev Ayhalim. He's Tiferes. What's Tiferes? We learned recently, Klalias HaGvanim. This is the mixing of different colors, because Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are the three primary colors. We learned about that entire Mem Hey when we spoke about not Mem Hey, sorry, Mem Gimel, Mem Beis, when we spoke about singing the words of Tefillah, right, the Keshes and Selim and Demos, and to illuminate the Keshes with the colors of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And so this is called Klalias HaGvanim. And Mechinas Tefillin. This is going to be an aspect of Tefillin and Ikra and Pe'er, because Tefillin are called splendor, which is something that we learned in Torah Lamed Ches, where we spoke about that in Eis Hey. Also, right, at the end of Eis Hey, we spoke about Tefillin and its connection to Hisparos, which is an aspect of the many colors. Yaakov Avinu. Titen Emes LiYaakov. You shall wear your splendorous turban, and that's a reference in the Gemara, is seen as a reference to Tefillin. And the primary Ashiros comes from Emes. Kushta koi. Truth stands. What's the symbol of standing? And the Yukum that was within their possession, Asher Baragleim, that they were carrying along with them as they walked, says Chazal Zemamoinoi, right? Shemamidina Adam al Raglav, Sha'alav Koi. That's the Lashon of the Gemara. This is a person's property that enables a person to stand firmly, right? There's also a symbol that we've learned previously. Says the Rebbe, okay, Kushta Koi. If money is what's Mamidin Adam al Raglav, so that's an aspect of standing, and that's a person's wealth. So then kushta koi. You want to access koi, which is the aspect of standing, which is mamayna shal adam shemamid and oisal raglav. There's only one way. Kushta. Living a truthful life. Living a truthful life. Living a transparent life. A Yaakov Avinu life. And this is a fascinating Gemara in Brachas that speaks about a pasuk also in the Teichach of Ahayu Chayechat Tluyim Mineged. I believe is the next word in that pasuk, and your lives shall be Tluyim, like not stable. What's the word? Tali. Hanging. Right, and it's early in the morning. So, says the Gemara, this is a reference to somebody who hangs up their tefillin. It's also given there. A person goes to the bathroom, can you hang the tefillin on a hook? Which way should you hang it, by the bottom or the top? This is a reference to ha'toilet tefillah. It's a pasuk that says, V'hayu chayecha tzluyim. But the Gemara Menashe comments on this pasuk, V'hayu chayecha tzluyim, in a much more literal sense, and says, what's the interpretation of this curse, right, of this consequence? This refers to a person, it really says over there, minapalter, I believe, but the Rebbe says minashuk. This is a person who doesn't have any money to have grain at home. And so they rely on the gifts that a person's getting from the palter, from the baker at the end of the day. And they don't have any money, right? And so they have to go and get the handouts of the person, right, of the baker at the end of the day who's giving away all the bread. It shouldn't get stale for the next day. Okay? Hainu, what this tells us is, Shahadalas ba al yidei become tefillin. Poverty comes on account of pegam tefillin, which, like we said, is Yaakov Avinu, because tefillin is pe'er, and pe'er is klalius hagvanim. Klalius hagvanim is Yaakov, right? And Yaakov Avinu is emes. So ayidei pegam shel emes, this is going to cause a person, right, who is going to suffer chas v'shalom poverty, because again, the Gemara in Brachas told us chayecha tuluyim was an aspect of a toilet tefillah. And if it's a reference to a person is toilet tefillah, which we're learning about means it's a pegam tefillin, that means, says the Gemara Menashe, another interpretation of that very pasuk is that a person is going to suffer chas v'shalom from the experience of poverty. Says the perhaps one of my favorite lines in the Sefer, especially now, Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael she'ikr kabbalasa mebchinas Yaakov, that Eretz Yisrael's main energy is energy of Yaakov, Kamasha Kosav Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz. This happens to be by Bar Mitzvah Parsha, by the way. Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz, Meguri Aviv be'eretz Canaan. Yaakov Avinu dwelled in the land. Pirish, Zenikres Eretz Achayim. This is why Eretz Yisrael is called Eretz Achayim. Ki Tefillin Nikram Chayim, because Tefillin is called Chayim Kamasha Kosav, because the pasuk says in Yeshayahu, Hashem Aleihem Yichyu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's really adni over there. Alav Talad Nun Yud Aleihem Yichyu, shall live upon you, shall bring you to life. And Chazal darshan that this is a reference to Tefillin, which is Aleihem. And this is also, the Rebbe doesn't even bring this, I don't think, but if you go back to the end of the paragraph we just learned, what was the remez in the Gemara in Brachas that means toilet tefillah? On what pasuk was that going on? It was going on the pasuk V'hayachayecha Tzaluyim. And so it's very beautiful. If we're learning over here in another Gemara that Hashem Aleihem Yichyu is a reference to Tefillin, so the Memela, this might be where the Gemara Brachas got it from, that V'hayu Chayecha Tzaluyim, because we already connected Chaim to Tefillin, and Chaim is Tamid, is going to be a reference to Tefillin. So Memela, maybe that's where Chazal got this drasha, right, in Brachas, to be able to ascertain that this pasuk, V'hayu Chayecha Tzaluyim, is actually a reference to Tefillin. Be that as it may, we have over here from the pasuk Yeshayahu another reference to Tefillin, Hashem Aleihem Yichyu. V'zeh Shivcha. And this is the praise of Eretz Yisrael, which we said is the collective energy of Yaakov Avinu, which we connected to Emes, which we connected to Pe'er, which we connected to Tikkun Taavas Achilah, Ha'aras Panim. What's the praise of Eretz Yisrael? It's an Eretz asher loy b'miskenus toicha b'alechem. Pasuk in Devarim says Eretz Yisrael is a land where you eat bread without poverty. Asher loy b'miskenus toicha b'alechem. So the Rebbe explains. Sometimes a person is sort of resorted to eating bread because they have nothing else. And bread is the most basic staple. So if a person needs sustenance, they're gonna, whatever little money they have, they'll scrape together. And it's always like crusty old black bread, that poor people are eating. It's not, they're not eating ragalach, or something. Like, it's always lechem, right? Why? Because lechem is the ikar desada, as pita, the Gemara says. Bread is the primary sustenance of a person. Pas shacharis, right? Bread is the foundation for our sustenance. So the Rebbe says sometimes a person will only eat bread on account of poverty. And it isn't because, he's curtailing his desire for a good pizza or a good burger or a good, falafel, and that's why he's only eating bread. No, it's because he can't, he doesn't have another option. But if a person does have access to a thing called Deliveroo, for example, or Uber Eats, or what do they have in America? DoorDash, maybe? I don't know. These different things. And a person, Instacart, okay. So a person has access to all this stuff, and so then a person wouldn't only eat bread; he would order out. So says Rabbi Nachman, the pasuk referring to the Shavach Eretz Yisrael, which we said is Iker Kabbalahs from Bechinas Yaakov Vayeshev Yaakov be'aretz or be'eretz, Eretz Hachayim, a land full of tefillin, full of the energy of tefillin. Says the Rebbe, "Is a Shavach Eretz Yisrael. Shaloi machmas aniyus toichalechem." You understand? Api pshat. It means Eretz Hashaloi b'miskinus toichalechem. It means you'll be able to eat bread, which just means food, right? What's the primary message of that pasuk? There will not be poverty, right? Eretz Hashaloi b'miskinus toichalechem. The Rebbe learns it's much deeper. He's saying no, it's not a comment about poverty. It's that too. but not be'ikr. Be'ikr, it's a comment about Tikkun Taavas Achilah. Says the Rebbe, because usually a person who will only eat bread is because b'miskinus. What can he do? He's the only thing he could afford is bread. You understand? Says the Rebbe, no. Eretz Yisrael is a land where bread is eaten, but loy b'miskinus, not on account of poverty. On account of what then? Shviras Taavas Achilah. Says the Rebbe, Eretz Yisrael bread is eaten, but not because there's nothing else to eat. Bread is eaten it's a land where people are less megusham. Even today, right? The culture is far less megusham. As time goes on and more Americans filter in, a little bit, things might be changing. But that video that went around yesterday, of Rabbi Yitzchak Berkowitz speaking about the imperative of every person to at least really consider seriously moving to Eretz Yisrael at this moment in history, he spoke very much over there, about the maila of living in a land where, and he said, just sociologically, it's possible because of, you live in wars, you don't have so much time, life is much more visceral because people are thinking about mortality and not necessarily about, things of Gashmias. But according to Rabbi Nachman, it's deeper, right? It's a vart in the land itself. This is a land of essentiality. It's a land of transparency. Eretz asher eini Hashem Eretz asher tamid eini Hashem lekechaba. Right? It's a land that's just everything is far more like a matzah, basic, essential, real. Much more real. The people are much more real. The worries are much more real. The debates are much more real. People actually stand for things, whether we like it or not. From all the way over here in Chutz La'aretz, probably not. But watching, people are life is pulsating there. It's on the stage. It's in the spotlight. So says the Rebbe, that's pshat in the pasuk. It's a land that's filled with the energy of Taavas Achilah. A bittul Taavas Achilah. Ki mikabeles ha'ara v'hashpa mebechinas tefillin. Because we already said the land is full of the hashpa of tefillin, which are called Chaim, and this is called Eretz HaChaim. Mebechinas Yaakov, which is the aspect of Yaakov Avinu, because it's the land of Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz. Mebechinas Yaakov bechinas emes. Shemisham ba'ashiras, the aspect of emes that we said, that's where wealth comes from, because kushta kai, and kai, like we said, is a reference to wealth, and if a person wants to access wealth, kushta. That's Eretz Yisrael. But again, what kind of ashiras is he speaking about? Right? It can be argued, especially once you're speaking about Eretz Yisrael, that it's not like ashiras. Right, it's the bechina of, like maybe the Gemara Adar, ein ani elam adas, right? It's an ashiras of consciousness, or the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, ezu ashir, probably more specifically asameach v'chelkoi, because you have a person who's only eating bread, right? And at the same time he's an ashir. That's what that means, right? He's happy with what he has. He doesn't need so much. We always speak about Rabbi Nachman's famous story of the Chacham and the Tam, the 9th story in Sipurei Maisius, right? Where the Rebbe sets up this whole, if you haven't read it yet, please find a couple of minutes. It's not very long to read it today. It's on Sefaria. You could just go online. The 9th story in Sipurei Maisius. I'll try to send out a link to it, Bli Neder. Phenomenal to read. Amish, one of the core texts in Breslev Chasidus, if not the, but certainly one of the core texts. And over there, make a longer story quite short. It's a story about two friends who grew up together. They have very different natures. One of them is very sophisticated and intellectual. The other one is very simple, not stupid, but very simple-minded and tamim, right? One is called the Chacham, and one is called the Tam. And the Rebbe basically says this story about how they both grow up and their evolution based on their natures. And the Chacham is never satisfied, and he always wants to learn, all the different wisdoms. And whenever he becomes the master of one trade, he says, well, this is chashuv here, but what about, I want to be prominent, somewhere else. He has to learn something else. He's always trying to impress everybody. And eventually he gets so incredibly smart and so incredibly advanced that he can't handle anybody, and he's constantly frustrated, and he's such a fanuk, he's so mifunak that, what's the word? He's so, he's sophisticated, but no, mifunak. Sensitive, finicky. Finicky, fanuk. It's probably the same word. Not really, but he's that too. But that's not. Finicky means a delicate, a very delicate person. So nothing is to his liking. He's always miserable. Right? He has everything. He's super wealthy and mamish living a miserable existence. Meanwhile, the Tam is mamish simple. and he becomes a shoemaker, and he's so simple, he doesn't really understand the trade so well. The best he could do is he makes shoes that have 3 edges like a hamantash, and it don't look like shoes. And his wife is busy criticizing him all the time, and he's just happy because he's just satisfied. He's just satisfied. Some very famous lines in that story. He says, "Zemasa shalai, zemasa shali." Why should I care about the other shoemaker's shoes down the block, in his shop, that he makes beautiful shoes and get charged so much? That's his maisa, and this is my maisa. All right, lama lanu ledaber me'acherim. Why do I have to speak about anybody else? I'm focused on what I'm doing. He was very wholesome, very simple and wholesome. And there's a very famous scene, so to speak, in the story where Rabbi Nachman describes his meals, where Taka, all he had on account of poverty was bread. And what he would do is he would ask his wife to cook him the most delicious eggplant parmesan, right? She would take the knife and cut a stale piece of this black bread, and she would bring it to the table. And the Rebbe said he would take a bite of the bread, and he would mamish start praising this eggplant parmesan, like, I never had such delicious, and describing the sauce and the cheese and just how warm and delicious and heavenly it is. And the Rebbe said he would mamish taste eggplant parmesan. And then he would say, I think I'm in the mood for some blintzes. She would cut him another piece of bread, bring it to the table. And this is the way it went with his food. This is the way it went with his drinks. He would ask for this fine wine, and she would pour him some dirty water. And he would ask for beer, dirty water. Now I think I'll have a tea, dirty water. And he would mamish taste in it like the man, because he was a bechina of Ezu Ashir, Hasameach B'chalkai, right? And that's, by the Rebbe, that's what Ashiris means. And so again, hard to imagine that it's referring to Ashiris Mamish after you just described. But again, it could be that also. It opens up Hashpa. But I think I'm far more inclined to believe that it's a reference to this deeper kind of Ashiris, of a consciousness of Hasameach B'chalkai. That a person has a little, but they don't need anything more than that. And they are mamish happy. Whereas the other guy, like, what was it, Elon Musk posted the other week, whoever said money can't buy happiness knew what he was talking about. Unbelievable. The man's by far the wealthiest man in the world, right? Trillionaire. And this is what he posts, so. Okay, so back inside. Says the Heilige Rebbe, it is not on account of poverty. Taavas Achilah. Says the Rebbe, this is pshat in the passing about Midbar, where the Meraglim came back and they said Eretz Yisrael is a land that devours its inhabitants. Listen to this unbelievable drasha. Rebbe reveals new layers of Torah. Unbelievable. Perish, he says, you know what it means? Shihi mikabeles shifa mibechinas Yaakov. K'mayshikasav vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz. How did we know that Eretz Yisrael is full of the consciousness of Yaakov Avinu? Because of the pasuk vayeshev Yaakov, right? So Yaakov is compared to vayeshev, right? It's associated with dwelling. Says the Rebbe, Eretz, it's a land where Aicheles, the way that we eat in Eretz Yisrael, is Yoshveha, a reference to vayeshev Yaakov. It's a land where the eating is filled with Yaakov Avinu energy. Eretz, Aicheles, Yoshveha. The eating is vayeshev Yaakov. It's a land of tefillin. It's a land of Chaim Amitim. It's a land of Tmimos, and it's a land of Ashiris, and it's a land of Emes. V'zeh perish, and this is also pshat when referring to the necessity to give a pauper back his mashkin, right? At the end of the day, if a person leaves a mashkin by you, you can't take it away from him, right? Because the pasuk says that's all he has. And what you're going to take his pillow, his blanket, you're going to take his ksus. He doesn't have so much clothing, so you have to give the mashkin back, and then when he doesn't need it, he'll give it back to you. You have to let him use his mashkin, right? So the pasuk says, Kihu simla sela, right? This is his simla. This is what he wears on his skin, and says that tikkun zayar da'ar shel tefillin. This is a reference to the skin of tefillin. Unbelievable. Reference to ar, ayin vav reish, skin, da'ar shel tefillin, sheban nichnas bechinas tefillin, because it is with regard to such a person that we want to bring the light of tefillin into his life. So Reb Nosson explains over here, which is quite rare for Reb Nosson to interject like this. This is, by the way, not what I meant. Reb Nosson will take over properly later on, but just Reb Nosson feels the need, because it's so terse and dense, for Reb Nosson to clarify a little bit. And he says, right? This seems very difficult to understand. The kesher between kihisim lasel ayrai, the da'ar shel tefillin, shabbat nichnas u'bechinas tefillin. How does this connect? Says Rav Nosson, what Rav Nachman's holy intention was that we learned about Avishai tefillin shubechinas emes bechinas Yaakov shuzoychai al yedei shviras Taavas Achilah al yedei zen itzoyli midalas v'aniyas kanal. We learned that on account of a person living a life of tefillin consciousness, which is the life of emes titan emes liYaakov, which is the life of Yaakov, right? Who is zoycha. And a person is zechus to this through the shvir of Taavas Achilah. We learned that through this a person is saved from at least some kind of poverty and paucity. So it says the Rebbe, says Rav Nosson, that's why Rabbi Nachman brought this pasuk. And he's referring to this that we learned about tefillin saving a person from poverty. How so? Perish, meaning. This pasuk, like we said, is referring to a pauper. This ksus, which you've taken as a mashkun for a loan, you need to give it back to him because that's all he has. This is referring to the shechina that is poor, that is a pauper, so to speak, in its gullus. Aniya badala, the bechina of malchus, the less than megame klum. Right? It's devoid. It's the moon without the light of the sun. Right? Malchus to Sitrachra. And it's stuck. Shemisham ikra aniyas shel Yisrael begalus. And that's where all of our aniyas comes from because we are that. It is we. Right? We are the Shechina. The Shechina in Galus is Klal Yisrael's in Galus. Right? Klal Yisrael's in Galus. The Shechina is Nigala Imayah. Right? The Shechina goes into Galus with us. Fascinating how the Gemara in Gittin makes a very specific reference to, amazing, right? So that whole sugya over there is a spella. That whole Gemara, it's a Chava, like we only really learn it properly on Tisha B'Av, and even then Kulei Haiva Ulai. But the whole sugya over there about the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash and how that whole story unfolded at Kamsa Bar Kamsa, right? The bottom of the Amud going to an Amud Aleph, right? And Zayin, I think, or so, something like that. That whole incredible sugya. So it says over there that it was Unkelis Hager, right? Before he converted, he was raising all of these different people from the dead, and he was asking them, "What's the position of Klal Yisrael Lamala?" And they were all answering him. Titos he raised, I believe, different Rishonim he raised. He said, "Klal Yisrael is Chashav Lamala," right? And one of them says and that's why I made a post yesterday. He says something very meduyak. I made a post about the academic conversations about how far back in Jewish history Kabbalah reaches. Like when did it emerge? And I just find it absurd because nobody would ever ask when electricity was invented, right? It's understood that whenever electricity was discovered, it is revealed to have always ever been there, right? It's just we weren't able to channel it because we weren't aware of it. The nature of the Kabbalistic literature is such that what it does is it unveils layers of meaning that are embedded into the text. In other words, it's not like this new external system that we got from the Neoplatonists and we got from Philo of Alexandria or the Gnostics or all these different places that they say, oh, it must have come from somewhere outside of Klal Yisrael because you don't find it in the classic standard rabbinic text. It's like, no, the text is moira. It's made on itself just by dint of the nature of the content that this was literally part of the kavanah of David HaMelech when he wrote Tehillim and all of the different authors of all of Tanakh, because it's too consistent a system, it's too tight. The shemas all show up exactly where you'd expect them to in association with all the different words, as anybody who learns Shari Ira knows, right? It's which I highly recommend if you can to try to learn Shari Ira. Over there you see it's mamish mavur. It's in the psukim. It's like you don't know how you read these psukim before you knew this chachma. So, like, what are you talking about? When was it? When was it initiated? It was the whole nature of the chachma is that it shows that it was there all along, right? That's what it is. It's discovery. It's not invention. Okay, so that's just a small comment. But over here you see that in this Gemara in Gittin, because the Gemara in Gittin says, quoting one of these people that Unkelis Hager raised up using magic and sorcery from the dead, they said, whoever touches Klal Yisrael, and it's a very precise lashon, which doesn't really have a pshat, al pi pshat, it's just a metaphor, but al pi Kabbalah, it's miduyak. He said, it's ki ilu naga bebas einoi shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's like someone touched the bas ayin, the pupil of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now again, al pi pshat, you can read that Gemara, which I'm sure the Mefarshim do, al pi pshat. It just means, it's like poking Hashem in the eye. Okay, it's a metaphor. Why didn't it use some other metaphor? Kacha, this is the metaphor that he... But al pi Kabbalah, it's incredibly precise. Because in Kabbalah we know that there are tlas gavna de'ena, there are three colors of the eye, right? As the eye moves further in from the white, right? And then the colors within the eye. And then there's bas ayin. And these three is Yud, Hey, and Vav. Right? We've learned this many times before, and in Kabbalah this is basic. And then the black in the middle of the eye is the last Hey. And that black in the middle of the eye that is the last Hey is the Shechina. And Klal Yisrael is Malchus, is the embodiment of the Shechina. And so you see in a non-Kabbalistic rabbinic text a very obvious direct reference to this Kabbalistic concept that Klal Yisrael are associated with the Shechina in its collectivity. Memela, yes, anybody who touches Klal Yisrael, ki ilu naga bebas eino shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's very precise. It's the bas ayin, the bechina nukva, right? That aspect of the blackness in the eye, which is a reference to the Shechina that's embodied in Klal Yisrael. Just an interesting thing. Okay, back inside. This is where our poverty comes from. Like it says in the Tikkun Zayar, ki hiksusa, and this is what it says in the Tikkun Zayar. Ki hiksusa, hi sivolase la'ayrai, dat filin. A reference to that which is going to be mechasev, the aniyus of Klal Yisrael, to protect Klal Yisrael from their aniyas, is going to be the ar of tefillin, because the ar of tefillin we learned is the ar of tikkun Taavas Achilah. Tikkun Taavas Achilah is going to give us ashiras, like we learned, because it's kushta, and kushta is koi. Says the Rebbe, beautiful. That's pshat in this tikkun azar, that when you're looking at a person who is a pauper, so then kihik susai hisim lasal, what's going to cover this pauper's skin? What's going to protect this pauper? The answer is tefillin. Da tefillin. This is the light that's going to protect us from living a life of poverty, from living a life of a lack of consciousness, a life of malchus to sitra achra, a life of lack, as opposed to a life of abundance. Because like we said, tefillin is mevatel a person's dalus. Like we said, ein ani elam adas, and tefillin is moichin. Right, like we learned, because the primary shefa and ashiras is drawn down like the bechinas Yaakov. Still waiting for that to manifest in my life. Nimshach Yaakov. Right, Yaakov is supposed to be the channel for wealth. Shu bechinas emes bechinas tefillin. Kachner l'lefarish, says Rav Nosson, that seems to be what Rabbi Nachman intended to write. V'zeh pirish, here the Rebbe continues, V'nasati Esav b'sadchel v'amtecha. Says the Rebbe, Esav the Ayin Beis Shin. Alright, Esav is Ayin Beis Shin. We've spoken about in the past that there's a Shem Ayin Beis, which is the first 42 letters in the Torah, which is an energy of Gevura that results in the creation of nature, right? Which is the firm, steady, dependable, a sturdy experience of the natural world. And then you have the Shem Ayin Beis. Ayin Beis is an energy of chesed, right? Where did the name Ayin Beis come from in the Torah? From 3 psukim that relate to Kriyas Yamsuf. Why Kriyas Yamsuf? Because the Yam not splitting is the Shem Ayin Beis, right? That's the energy of Gevura. It does what it's supposed to do. Shattering Gevura is an energy of Chesed. It just breaks all the boundaries. We learned this, right? And these 3 psukim are Vayisai, Vayava, Vayet. And the way, again, that you get these three, this 72 name, it's split into triplets, right? It's split into pairs of 3. You take the first letter of the first pasuk, the last letter of the second pasuk, and the first letter of the first pasuk of the last pasuk, and you have your 3. Right, that's your 3, your first triplet of the 72-letter name. You go to the second letter of the first pasuk, the second to last letter of the second pasuk, and the second letter of the third pasuk, and you have your next triplet. And this is the way the name works, like this. You go through all the letters, and the top 2 are moving along, right, through the psukim keseder, and it's drawing back, right, the letter in the middle pasuk. That's the movement that gives a person the 72 letters. What you see here is that the name Esav is going to be a direct reference to the 72-letter name, because that's what it is. It's Ayin Beis Shin. Why Shin? Because the Shin has 3 branches, referring to the 3 psukim from which we get the Shem Ayin Beis, and you have the name Ayin Beis. So Ayin Beis Shin, right, which is Esav, is going to be a reference to the 72-letter name of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Da Klalius Hagvanim, and this is ultimately the Klalius Hagvanim. Why? Because every time you have 3, it's obviously the energy of the Avos, and that's what it is. The first letter in the first pasuk is going to be the energy of Chesed. The last letter in the second pasuk is going to be considered the energy of Gvura, and the first letter in the last pasuk is going to be the energy of Tiferes, Yaakov Avinu. So it says, "V'nasati Esav." When you have the energies of the Klalius Hagvanim, Tiferes, Yaakov Avinu, then Besadcha Livhem Techa. You know when you'll get that? Besadcha Livhem Techa. We learned this. Also, the Rebbe is bringing a lot of different elements that we learned. We learned this in Torah Lamites. Very similar thing. Kishet Es ha-bahamias, when you shatter your bahamias, which is Besadcha Livhem Techa, Kishet the bahamias. Az Yizgala Klalius Hagvanim. V'nasati Esav. You know when you're going to access Esav, which is the shame of Chesed, but it's a shame of Klalius Hagvanim because it involves all 3 avos, the 3 psukim, Vayisa, Vayava, and Vayet, those 3 psukim beginning with those 3 words. V'nasati Esav, the answer is B'sadcha Livhem Techa. When a person can shatter their bahamias, and a person can overcome Taavas Achilah, then they're going to be able to access this great light of Klalius Hagvanim, K'mashe Kasav, Yisa Hashem, Panav Elecha. And this is the aspect of a Kodesh Baruch Hu being Masi Panim, like the pasuk says, Eich loy, like the Gemara says, Eich loy esalehem panim, and Yamarti v'chalta, etc. V'heim edaktikim because Isaac. So the Rebbe continues, Ukashapayim the MS, but when a person blemishes in this consciousness of MS, they're not living with authenticity. Like the pasuk says, we say it every morning, right? Chazal say, La'olam yehi adam yarish shamayim, B'seiser uvagalui, right? That's emes. That's toicha kabarai, right? That's not a person who's nitzrich lebrius, right? Nitzrich lebrius means I'll only do it when other people are watching, right? That means la'olam yehi adam yarishamayim begalui. That's nitzrich lebrius, right? But when a person is be'emes, then it makes no difference. At home, other people, all the time, that's emes. Says the Rebbe, Kishapoigim be'emes, b'klalius hagvanim, azay nasa miklalius hagvanim busha. A person who doesn't live in this way, it's a life of shame. Ubalav busha, and that says the Rebbe, this is connected to Anios Kamasha Kasav, Kirum Zulus Livnei Adam Nishtana Panav Lekamagvanim Kikrum. Right? And this is the aspect of Anios and busha. Again, many themes that we learned in the past Torahs. Where do we have busha? Lamed Ches Ois Hey. Right? We spoke about the same thing over there. In its connection to tefillin, or not having the Aruv tefillin, having the Aruv tefillin, these things are connected. Listen to this remez. Va'anachnu b'nei Yisrael mekablim ha-shefa derech Eretz Yisrael. We know that we receive shefa through the channel of Eretz Yisrael. The shefa Eretz Yisrael u'aras b'nei Yaakov. And the shefa of Eretz Yisrael, like we said, is the illumination of the countenance of Yaakov Avinu, which is ha'aras tefillin, which is the light of tefillin. This is just unbelievable. Remez. And that's why it says about Eretz Yisrael, and it's in the bracha to Naftali, Naftali ayela shlucha, hanoisein imre shafer. And the Gemara in Saita, I believe it's a Gemara in Saita, tells about how Naftali ran to get the document, right? Remember? They sent Naftali to run to get the document at the funeral of Yaakov Avinu, right? Because Esav came and he was claiming, that's my portion of the Mars Machpelah. They said, no, it's Yaakov Avinu. We own it. It's Yaakov Avinu's portion. And he had a star about that. So they sent Naftali, because he was the swiftest runner, to run and get the document. And that's the Gemara Darshans on this pasuk. Naftali ayala shlucha. Naftali is a very swift deer, right? Hanoisin imrei shafer, who is able to go ahead and bring the document. That's what Chazal comment, okay? Just as an aside. Says the Rebbe, look at the pasuk. Before that, says the Rebbe, Rashi over there brings from Chazal that this is a reference to Eretz Yisrael, to the portion of Naftali, which was Ayala Shlucha, because the grain over there and the produce grew so swiftly and so fully that it was just like you planted it and boom, and it sprouted, right? It was praising the portion of Eretz Yisrael that's called Naftali. So says the Rebbe, Hanois Inimrei Shafer, Shefer is a Bechinas Pe'er, Shefer is beauty, is splendor. That's the aspect of Pe'er, Bechinas Tefillin. That's going to be a reference to Tefillin. Hainu Shehinois Senes, Lano, Oisiyos Ha'ara, Shekibla Mitfillin. Eretz Yisrael, especially in the portion of Naftali, is sending forth Tefillin energy. Hanoisein Imre Shafer it's sprouting beautiful produce on account of Shefer, which is Pe'er, which is Tefillin. V'zepirish, so the pasuk says, this is just unbelievable. Ein davar kazeh. Re'ei chayim im isha asher ahavta. The pasuk in Gedalyah says, live life with the wife that you love. Re'ei chayim im isha. Says the Rebbe, what's chayim? Where do we see Chaim earlier in the Torah? What's Chaim a reference to? Tefillin. We have two references to it, right? Hashem aleichem yichyu, and the pasuk v'hayachayecha atzluyim. Right? Both times Chaim was interpreted as a reference to Tefillin. Says the Rebbe, okay, Chaim is Tefillin im Isha. Isha, says the Rebbe, is Rosh Taavas Hanoisin Imre Shafer. Rosh Taavas Isha. So not only is Shefer a reference to Tefillin, in the context of Eretz Yisrael, that's a land that we learned is full of Tefillin energy, Yaakov Avinu energy, MS energy, Ha'aras Panu energy, v'chulei. But the word Isha, the word Isha here in this pasuk, linking Chayim, Tefillin, to Isha is itself Hanois in Imre Shafar. V'zeh re'ei Chayim daika. Ki Tefillin ikaram Chayim, because Tefillin is Chayim, Tefillin is Moichin. V'zeh, says the Rebbe, Naftali Ayala Shlucha. Of course, it's going to be Naftali, because Naftali is the same letters as Tefillin. Code. So this is all made up. This all is made up later in Jewish history. It's a pasuk. Right? What do you mean made up? It's here. It's mevur. It's too consistent across multiple psukim in Rosh, Taavas, Taavas, Gematria, Shevas, Pilei Plai. So says the Rebbe, this whole formulation of Naftali Ayla Shlucha, that Al Pi Pshat is referring to a portion of Eretz Yisrael and the beauty of the land, is already connected to Tefillin because of the word Shefer, which is Pe'er. Then also Hanoisin Imre Shefer is Rosh Taavas Isha, and that's where Chayim Im HaIsha. Chayim we said is Tefillin because we connected it in a different way to Tefillin. Chayim is Tefillin, Isha is Hanoisin Imre Shefer. And about who are we speaking about? Naftali. And Naftali is the same letters as Tefillin. Altogether, this is the energy of Eretz Yisrael. It's an energy of Tefillin. It's an energy of Shviras Taiva. It's an energy of Tshuva. It's an energy of returning to the way that we're supposed to live. And I really believe, I've said it again, I'll say it again. I believe it. At this moment in history, Hashem is really, really inviting us home. And again, if a person can have it on their radar, like I mentioned, obviously there are challenges, and person I don't think is expected to just, drop everything and come what may. This is the sole consideration. But Baruch Hashem, it's really happening where...
Why not?
Huh?
If it's MS, why not?
Because it might be MS, but it might not be MS Lamitai. Right? In other words, there are multiple factors. If it was so clear-cut, it would be so clear-cut. It isn't. HaKadosh Baruch Hu always runs the world in a way of la'at, using people's bechira. That's very important. It's not coercive. It's not. Nobody's going to stand up and say, I'm paskening, everybody's got to leave. HaKadosh Baruch Hu unfolds history in a very, very gentle, hidden, slow, natural way. Generally, right? And so what's happening now, I think, is that as a result of the shifting circumstances, both in Chul, right, all over the place, there's no place that's safe. Right? No, but I'm saying this is happening everywhere, that everybody perceives the world is changing, sentiment is changing, anti-Semitism is like rising is the understatement of the century. It's through the roof. I mean, what's going on the left, on the right, and more specifically what's happening in Eretz Yisrael, like we said, with the situation changing there. And the more people that move, the more infrastructure there's, more people move, the more, so I think just naturally, it's definitely true that far more now than when I was growing up, and I think probably when many of you were growing up, most of you were growing up probably, the mainstream talk about Aliyah and about Eretz Yisrael being on the radar. I mean, it's way, way, way higher. I would say even in the last 3, 4, or 5 years, since October 7th. I don't know, what the statistics show per se, but just in the culture, everybody and his brother, everybody said, yeah, when I marry off this kid, when this one is old enough, but everybody knows, I think everybody knows that. Everybody should know that. Anybody paying attention knows that, right? However, HaKadosh Baruch Hu operates.
Eretz Yisrael too.
True. I'm not saying that this means it's Geula.
And there's particular energy of Golos in Eretz Yisrael at this point in time as well.
Yes, I don't know if it's particular any more so than Chutz La'aretz, but there's no question about it. Kibbutz Galias doesn't mean after Mashiach comes. There's a process.
There's a particular Golos which is being manifested in Eretz Yisrael.
Sure.
Which is not elsewhere.
Sure.
What are you referring to, sorry?
Zionism.
Right.
Okay, I mean, again,
I'm talking about the particular time now.
Let's try not to get dragged into that debate now. But what I could say is though that part of what Rabbi Berkowitz was trying to express also is that Adar, right? The more that Chevra move, right, who are able to bring a balanced energy, who are able to bring, he says the tikkun will be, you didn't come from Chol. You have a society that's incredibly traumatized, incredibly polarized, incredibly intense and extreme in many ways. And if you can have more of a balanced energy, more of a centered energy, which Yidden and Chutz La'aretz historically have had, so that's part of the tikkun, right? So the question is not, again, about where is it better for us to live, where is it not better. Again, here we're talking about listening more broadly to what HaKadosh Baruch Hu intends to communicate at this point in history. And anybody who learns the Meshech Chachma in Parshas Eikev Eschanan, very lengthy piece that's really required reading. I'm going to try to post that as well. You have to remind me I'm supposed to send a bunch of things. Well, I'll try to send that as well. And you read the way that he explains how Hashem moves Yidden along through Galus.
Who's the author of Meshech
Vermeer Simcha Dvinsk. See, he writes very clearly that this is what happens. Yidden are expelled from a land or some terrible devastation happens. And then they move on and they settle 100 years. Imam writes there's 100 years, 200 years. They build things. They think this is right. And then it happens again. But at this particular moment in history, where we are 300 years or so from the Elef HaShvi, I mean, we're at the very, very end of history. You know, L'chol Adeyas, like this is it. And there is nowhere else for Yidden to move. It's not like Yidden from England are moving to Paris and Yidden from Paris are moving to South Africa. Everyone is coming back home. So I think a person has to be blind, really blind, I would say at this point, to deny that something is happening. Now, to stand up and paskin that every single person, irrespective of any other factor, should get up and move. First of all, I don't think that that's true, and I also don't think that that's either going to be helpful to the process, because the way it's supposed to go, I believe, is that Hashem's hashkach is going to filter down through the bechira of each and every individual, given their very realistic factors of chinuch habanim and parnasa. But the point is, at this point in history, which is what I'm encouraging, is that a lot of the platitudes that people use or used 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, all the kids go off the derech, there's no schools, at this point, and this was the message of Rabbi Berkowitz, a person should be thinking a little bit more clear-mindedly about what is there and what isn't there, and like what it will require to sacrifice, and what it will also offer and avail. And when that conversation is approached a little bit more sober-mindedly and less ideologically, and more through the eyes of the tam as opposed to the chacham. So then you look at it through Tmimus and you say, well, yeah, this is what you'd expect to happen at this point in Jewish history, and that Hashem is being Mekabetz Nitchei Amei Yisrael. Hashem should enable all of us to be a part of it when it's right for all of us. We made a great start in Torah Mem Zayin. As Hashem, tomorrow we'll finish off Rabbi Nachman's piece, and then we'll go back to the beginning and allow Rabbi Nassim to unfold the teaching of Ezra Hashem.
Start off with Yosef and the bones, right?
Yeah.
So this week is Anshe Chodesh, that if the person doesn't have the Vedas and Trefus, should give it to the dog. That's Anshe Chodesh. What's the connection between Anshe Chodesh and throwing it to the dogs? And so Ramad Chaliyah says something unbelievable. He said because the last thing that Yidden saw that happened Shrine was the dogs not barking.
Right.
The dogs not barking was showing Yidden that you can go into nature just because something comes natural to you.
Oh, beautiful.
And that's why you reward the Vedas and Trefus to give to the dogs. Is not just giving to the dogs, it's starting with the dogs. It's Anshe Kodesh. If the dogs can control themselves not barking, you can control yourself. Just because something comes natural to you doesn't mean you should think it's and that's why I say the whole time, you become natural, they hide behind boss of Adam, wear this, wear that. No. They says no. The dogs also comes natural to them. But also what I love, this morning, I haven't been on the scales forever. This morning before I hit the shit, I went on the scales. For no reason. I thought, what's the matter? How bad is the matter? Literally, and then I come over here and it's talking about
crisis control.
It's just so
ואתה האב שלי שכל כך אוהב אותי האב שלי מלך חי וקיים על כל נשימה שאני